can begin. State your name.
My name is Theodore Norman Tees. Today is 10 November 2009.
Introduce yourself.
I am Richard Massa, and we are at Lake Michigan College, Benton Harbor, Michigan, conducting an interview as part of the Veterans History Project. Ted, can you tell us a little about your early background?
I was essentially raised in Buchanan, Michigan, which is right here in Berrien County. I graduated from Buchanan High School in 1965, became a student at Lake Michigan College. Britton Avenue, mind you, most of the people here won't remember that, but we were on Britton Avenue. And I'll go on into how I got into the Army. Doing fine. My sophomore year, first semester, I struggled with a couple classes. I'm sure that my social life had nothing to do with my academic performance, but there are those who would argue that case. I was taking a history of Western civilization class, which was a 4-credit-hour class. I got a D in that. I wasn't a bad student otherwise, but I was also taking a class called Analytic Geometry and Calculus. We got into differential equations. Some of my engineer friends also said that they struggled with differential equations. They call them diffie-Qs. And I failed the class. Well, that's a 5-credit-hour class. Doing the math, my grade point slipped to a 199, which was below the threshold. And not being a fortunate son, I was called in and put on academic probation or suspension for a semester. And Dr. Lehman, I think was his name, I still have the letter up in the attic somewhere, told me that he would also be notifying my draft board of my current academic status.
Now, Ted, while in high school or in your early college career there, would you say you were well informed and knowledgeable about the Vietnam conflict?
For the most part, as much as anybody would be. Music carried a lot of some discussion of Vietnam. It was in front of us on the news. I can't say that 18 and 19-year-olds spent a great deal of time reading newspapers, not nearly enough, or being fully aware, but I was aware that a number of my peers, the ones that didn't go to college, were either being drafted or had joined up, and Vietnam was a big part of that era, considering all the protest marches, and there were a lot of things going on. Well informed, perhaps not, but you could not avoid it. Everybody knew what was going on, or what they believed was going on.
Okay. Then you mentioned you were drafted, and once that occurred, where were you first sent?
After being drafted, I was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky, for basic training, and I think that was 8 weeks. 8 weeks of physical training, a lot of testing, a lot of shots, inoculations, some, I don't want to call it harassment, but they taught you to do things you didn't think you could do, and again, more physical training, some classroom basic weapons training, throwing hand grenades, rifle shooting, marching and running, and I got a lot of physical training.
Now, after basic training, is there pretty much a path laid out as to other courses you'll be going to, or is it a surprise when you get to the end of basic training?
During the course of basic training, probably developed by your the NCOs and officers that are observing the troops, recommendations plus the results of actual tests that you take indicate where you will, or result in where you end up for your advanced individual training, where you get you finish with your military occupational specialty. basic, you learn fundamental military courtesy, you learn how to be a soldier, how to look like a soldier. You develop a brand new skill set in your advanced training. Mine, being a bright young man, I thought, I'd end up sitting in an office or something, and they thought I'd look real good in the infantry. Surprise to me, but that's the way it shook out, and it didn't work out too badly.
Okay. And then after the basic, you went to?
Advanced infantry training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and I'm thinking that was 12 weeks. Then down there, we had a lot of continued enhanced weapons training, a lot more physical training, things like confidence courses where they would train you and teach you that you could do things that you didn't think you could do. You could go places you didn't think you could go. In retrospect, or looking back, it's pretty phenomenal training, all of the military training that you go through. So I have a lot of respect for that part of it. Got through that 12-week session, and I was offered an opportunity to go back or go to Fort Benning, Georgia, for NCO, non-commissioned officers candidate school, and that's how I ended up making higher rank than what's typical of a 2-year draftee. Went there, and I don't remember the duration of that, but that was quite extensive. A lot more classroom, a lot more physical training, training us how to become leaders, leadership preparation courses, how to lead men in basically in combat as an infantry squad leader, infantry platoon sergeant. And had an opportunity I jumped all over jump school. I had in the back of my mind, if I could convince them to continue to send me to training, that the war could possibly be over. And I had the opportunity because my test scores were good. And did I have an ulterior motive? Yes, I was still in this country. And but the military isn't full of a lot of dummies either. And they continued to train me up to a point where they sent me to Vietnam after graduating as a buck sergeant E5.
Now, that was probably your first extended time away from home with all those schools. Did you find it difficult to be away from your family and friends?
I truly did miss it, but the reality is I'd been out of high school for a year and a half. A lot of change. You're in the midst of change to begin with, becoming mature, becoming responsible for your own actions and so forth, finding and purchasing your own auto insurance. That was just little things like that, and part of growing up. I had moved away from home, and I was living in Benton Harbor in an apartment with 2 other guys, and working a part-time job, and partying a little too much on the weekends at the time, and probably contributed to my grade point slipping. But all that being said, it was a time of transition anyhow, and so it possibly made it easier.
Let's see, when they decided it was time to take advantage of your training and qualifications, and then you left the United States, and where did you enter Vietnam?
And we flew, and I believe we stopped for fuel in Hawaii, so I can claim that I have been to Hawaii. We were there for about 4 hours max, and then flew to Japan, so I can claim that I've been in Japan. Of all the countries I've visited, and then flew from there to Benoit Air Base, outside of Saigon, I believe.
Was there anything special about your arrival there that you might recall?
Never seen a steel landing runway before, and that was kind of interesting to step out and see a steel runway. The other thing, it was so horribly hot, and the heat and humidity was almost overwhelming. But that's the one thing I do remember. I didn't expect after being a buck sergeant, after being a sergeant, to have any harassment of any kind. Actually, everybody was very good. Come this way, let me help you. Very helpful. Come on in, we'll get you moving, we'll get you settled in. So,
And what was your first job assignment in Vietnam?
I was immediately sent up to Camp Evans, and in Tao Tien province, I believe it is, in near Hue. And I was assigned to Bravo Company, 1st of the 506 Airborne Infantry. And I arrived back there the same day that Captain Harold Erickson was returning from R&R in Hawaii, had been with his wife. And he was very nervous. And I didn't necessarily know why. And my thoughts were, okay, we'll get settled in here and I'll find a place to settle down. And I forgot what you call the guy that takes care of all your weapons in the company, armorer or something. And he issued me a weapon, magazines. He packed my rucksack, told me all the things I was going to need, the things that I didn't need, and so forth. And he was helping me. He had a lot of field experience. He'd been in the field, but he was in the rear. And he basically got me ready to go. And I said, ready to go? He says, you're going to go back to the field with Captain Erickson today. I says, well, we just got back about 10 hours ago. And I'm thinking, I got to settle in, find out. There is no bunk. So anyway, so off we went. And Captain Erickson was extremely nervous. And I found out later it was because he had gone on R&R. It was coincident with the same time that Bravo Company was part of the first of 506 assaulting Hill 937 down at Via, which is Hamburger Hill. And I couldn't figure it out. He was so, this man's an officer. He looks like he's on top of his game, but it was something horribly wrong, and I figured it out later. He felt like he had done something wrong by being gone. So, off we go.
So at that point, then, that was your first assignment out into the bush?
Yes. Yeah.
And what size group or squad, platoon, company, whatever were you with?
I was in the 4th platoon. I was assigned to the 4th platoon. They needed a sergeant, and it was pretty well equipped. I mean, we had the numbers. They had dissolved the 3rd platoon because the platoon leader had been wounded, and enough of the riflemen and such had been wounded that they dispersed those into the 4th platoon. And so I arrived at the same time that kind of a reorg was going on, and it made it a little bit, I don't want to say easier, but it was very confusing. I remember it being very, very confusing for me, and like, this is somewhat chaotic, but everybody was very receptive and helpful. I think they just recognized they needed the numbers.
So it sounds like pretty much as far as your first excursion into a real combat situation, you were in a position of leadership already?
Yes, I was given a squad. This is your squad, and introductions and such. Nothing real formal, but I think I had 3 riflemen. I had a machine gunner. One guy carried a M79 grenade launcher, and then 4 riflemen. And our numbers had been depleted significantly. And so I had a squad, and they took care of me. They did not. There was no hazing or anything like that went on. And I remember distinctly thinking that would occur. Here's the new guy. These guys were scared. They were horribly scared. And it was beneficial. it made it easier on me because I came with these clean clothes on and their mail and water, and there was no hazing, and I was amazed because I felt I fully expected it.
Now, had they experienced significant combat before that?
Yes, those previous week they had been part of an assault on Hill 937 and pushed back. They'd go up, rotate through the various platoons, trying to work their way up the hill, along with a multitude of other units trying to go up this hill and take it. They'd go up, fight, pull back, airstrikes, ARA, artillery pounded that hill. And that hill, what we didn't know, and they didn't know, what we didn't know until we discovered later when we finally took the hill, was those were concrete reinforced bunkers. Not just concrete with a bunch of sandbags over it. This concrete had steel in it, and concrete. And, you know, it was just really phenomenal. A lot of people don't realize we hit that hill with CS grenades. Or not CS grenades, but 105 CS artillery. CS is a gas. Burns all your mucous membranes. It doesn't hurt you or kill you long term, but it immobilizes you. I forgot the exact term, but it attacks all your mucous membranes, and you will get the hell out of Dodge if you you encounter CS gas. And we were very careful with it because we had to know which way the wind was blowing because we didn't have gas masks. What we didn't know is they had gas masks in the bunkers. That's how well equipped and prepared they were. We didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't expect it because I was under the assumption we were fighting a bunch of barbarians, illiterate barbarians, and whole new respect for these people.
So in that regard, maybe your preparation ahead of time had led you to a wrong conclusion regarding the enemy?
I think so. Nowhere, but in reflection, I know the people that trained us really continued to emphasize that these people you are up against a reasonably well-trained force, a motivated force, but we were in fact Americans. And, nobody kicks our butt. The parents and grandparents whipped everybody in World War II. Korea was kind of a struggle and politicized, but in all reality, everybody felt that we were successful in Korea. And so I think our mindset was we were invulnerable. And we were trained to be confident. You certainly wouldn't want to send infantry into the field that was not confident. So
How many soldiers were in your squad?
I had 7, I believe, the total. Four riflemen, a guy on a machine gun, a thumper, and what's that add up to? And me. That's
Seven's
about
good.
right, 7,
Yep.
yeah. I think typically, ideally, the numbers are much higher than that, but we dispersed people and kept ranks pretty much evened up. One of the things I think is, you talk about esprit de corps. The 3rd platoon was decimated to a certain extent, and a lot of the guys were distributed to the other platoons, and they came to us, and my platoon leader, he was an OCS guy. We called him Super Spud, and I honestly don't know his name. It was Super Spud. He was from Idaho, and so we called him Spud. And he's a very competent, good man. They told us, well, now that the 3rd platoon's been dissolved, you guys in 4-6 are going to be the 3rd platoon. And we wouldn't respond to their radio calls. No, 3rd platoon's gone. 3rd platoon has largely been swept away. And we continued the entire summer with 3 platoons, 1-6, 2-6, and 4-6, and there was no 3-6. because we left them. And I don't know, it was important to me, esprit de corps.
Can you describe the mission that you were on? Was it attacking the hill again, or was it going through the jungle looking for people, or what?
I finished up the last 3 days of the assault, going up, getting pushed back, watching this, thinking, this is, like I said, this is going to be a very long tour. And after that, they pulled everybody back. They pulled us back, took us back to Evans, which it gave me an opportunity to actually meet and learn and do some fellowshipping, if you would, with the guys in my squad and my platoon. We called it a stand down. They stood us down, and we got clean clothes, checked our weapons all over, got everything put back to where it needed to be. I was in pretty good shape myself. They always bring the battalion surgeon around to look everybody over to see what their specific needs were. And then we redeployed back into the A Shaw. And our mission was to, I guess the right term was search and destroy. We moved through the trails, moved through the jungles up in the A Shaw Valley, looking for, well, who it was the 29th NVA Regiment was up there. The Pride of Ho Chi Minh is what they called them. And they were still very active in that region. Even though we had driven them off Hamburger Hill, or off 937, they were still working in the area. And that's only, I think, 2 clicks from the Laotian border. And so they would scurry back over into Laos. There was supply that was coming down through there, and we were, constantly. And we'd make contact with the enemy every 2 to 3 days, sometimes longer, sometimes more often. So,
More often than not, was it the enemy who initiated fire, or vice versa?
more often than not, it was, sad to say, it was the enemy would initiate fire. I guess 40, 50 men moving through the trail, however quiet that they could try to be, would make just enough noise to become suspect. We were not horribly, we were very, very quiet. We got very good at it. But it is difficult to move that many people through the jungle, if you would. And it wasn't jungle, those trails were well established. It isn't like we were hacking our way through elephant grass or anything. But we made enough noise, I guess, that if somebody wasn't paying attention, they might suspect that something's going on.
Did you have an opportunity to be the point man on going through the trails?
I took point a couple times, although Lieutenant told me I shouldn't, but go ahead. You'll do 2 things. You'll better understand what you're telling these guys to do, and you can watch them and make sure that they're on top of their game. And it's kind of I'll man up and do it. It's no problem. And it didn't really bother me. Point man, you're 19, 20 years old. It's not a thrill, but it's you man up, I guess. Some psychology majors around here figured it out. Didn't make a habit of it, though, because the lieutenant did not want me on point. If something would happen, he wanted me making sure my squad had the leadership necessary to do what needed to be done.
Mm-hmm. And on the mission that you were on, were any of your squad members injured?
Yes. I had a point man getting hit very hard on Hill 916, which is about 1,500 meters from 937 one day. And he was down, and he wasn't killed, but he'd been hit in the shoulder quite badly, and we had been opened up on by automatic weapons fire machine guns from bunkers about 300 meters over, where there was a line of sight through the jungle, which doesn't happen very often, but they could see this trail just by virtue of how the foliage had grown. So he was hit hard, and I guess I kind of know where we're going here. Be perfectly honest, I didn't see anybody jumping out there to get him back. They basically had quit firing on him, and they were firing on the rest of the column. And so it was time to get him out of there. And so I brought my machine gunner up, and I told 2 other guys, get all the machine gun ammunition you can. And then, you know, we were behind trees and like over the slope a little bit. And I said, I'm going to go get McCoy. And I took off, and big as I am, I took off, scampered up to him, and he was moaning. That's what was really bothering me, because he was making just terrible noises. And did a little shooting on my way, and my machine gun. The rule is you fire 3 to 5 to 8 round bursts through a machine gun. I don't think that machine gun stopped for about 1.5 minutes. And that's dangerous for 2 reasons. The machine gun can jam and overheat because of that, with every 5th round being a tracer. The other thing that can happen is it makes it easier for those firing on him to pinpoint where that machine gun was. He had a little clump of, he was down, but he also had other guys up there feeding that machine gun ammunition, and the rest of the company was bringing out. But they covered me pretty well, and I went up there and I got him, and put him on my back and got him carried back to safety. Viking already had a medevac on the way. Viking, Captain Erickson. What a great name, eh? Captain Erickson already had medevac in the air, and by the time I got back, the platoon that was pulling drag was in the back of the column. It hacked out a opening big enough to drop, and so the bird can get the injured man out. This same day, as long as I'm the one telling stories, when I came back from bringing McCoy back, I looked at my machine gunner and just grinned, and he grinned at me. I said, "You're lucky you didn't melt that damn barrel." He said, "I don't care." Anyway, and I look up, here's Gordy Roberts. And Gordy Roberts he's not even in my platoon. And he had this look on his face. And I said, "What the hell are you doing up here, Roberts?" And he didn't say anything. Well, he'd been up there firing, covering me. He took off. Well, I won't go into details, but the reality is Gordy Roberts took off, circled around, assaulted the machine gun bunker and whoever it was that had us pinned down, and took them out. And he ended up running out of ammunition. And the record shows that he ended up doing his final assault with an AK-47 that he took off a dead NVA soldier. Gordy Roberts won the Congressional Medal of Honor because he was up covering me. That's the way I read it. So, but he's a wonderful guy. He was. I've got some pictures of him when he was 17, or not 17. I think he joined when he was 17. When he was a 19-year-old Spec 4, he became they made him a sergeant, and he got out, but he actually did get back in. I know that Don has been done a little research on him. We've been trying to get a hold of him. He was raised in Lebanon, Ohio, and so enough about Gordy Roberts. So, but he's back in the Army. He is the oldest or the longest and he's a bird colonel, and or bird or light colonel, I'm not sure, but he's still in on active duty. So, enough war stories.
In a situations like that, when you were fired on, in the response to it, was it more or less blind fire where you're just shooting off into space, or do you actually see individuals that you're aiming at? Are you just spraying or shooting point?
The initial bursts are typical, just spray to hopefully get their heads down while you find a place to get below a berm. And then you just don't just start blasting away because you're wasting your ammunition, which is somewhat precious. We always carried, we had 19 magazines with us, each with 19 rounds in each. And with an automatic weapon, you can burn through those relatively fast. But the reality is they're not standing up out there looking at you, and you aren't standing looking at them. And so it becomes a little cat and mouse game after that. You do utilize the training that you've had by trying to, one guy move forward while the others are firing and covering them, providing some covering fire. They move up while and move on to their position. That's the effort. But ideally, the reality is we get a gunship out there. And a gunship will, try and pinpoint exactly where we think they are, what direction they are from us, get a gunship up there, and two things happen. I'm not going to say dinks, but the dinks will know what's coming, and they'll DD him out. They're going to get out of Dodge, or they're going to go and find a bunker or slip down into some low area and try and disappear. Because a gunship with miniguns, aerial rocket artillery, the firepower that the United States has and had available is pretty phenomenal. And if you give them a gunship pretty good direction on where the fire was coming from your location, they can fire an area up pretty well and wreak all kinds of havoc on them. So a lot of the skirmishes, I guess you'd call them, that we had in the A-Shaw were relatively brief, sometimes deadly, but relatively brief. Hamburger 937 was was unique, that they didn't leave. And what we had on 916, this I think essentially set up an ambush for us. And so those are my thoughts.
Now, you mentioned the other soldiers' actions and getting a Medal of Honor for that, for your action in rescuing your downed squad member. Were you awarded any?
Yeah, I
medals
was
for that?
I was awarded a Silver Star. I think it's called for gallantry in action. So.
Now, how long were you out on that combat mission before you got a chance to go back and rest up and revitalize yourself?
We'd get mail and water every 2 to 5 days. We'd try and have enough water for 3 days because typically you'd encounter either a stream or a bomb crater where you could get water. And mail was the most important, mail and food, but mail was the most important thing, along with water. If you had to prioritize them, I'd say water, mail, and then food. You can go a long time without food, water, but and if you wanted to maintain your mental health, you had to have mail. And so 3 to 5 days to be replenished. A lot of the missions we were out on ran anywhere from 14 to 20 days, unless we were, of course, in monsoon season. But then that was kind of a stand down through the monsoon season. But, well, we pulled back out of the A-Shaw. There were other areas, but you couldn't even get in. It would be socked in so bad. And socked in meaning the cloud cover and storms would be bad enough that you weren't going to go there.
So then after the 20 days out, would you go back to a base and be in camp for?
That's
a
true.
time?
They'd bring us in, and again, the battalion surgeon would come around, see to our needs. We'd be fed hot meals, clothing, weapons checks, all those things. The other thing too, though, that we would rotate with the other companies on securing fire bases. A fire base is where they set up the artillery in various areas in your area of operation. And they would have overlapping fire for the artillery to protect and actually do, what is it called, harassing fire, and on the trails they'd fire on them. But these fire bases where the artillery was, which would be typically on a big hill, with bunkers and the infantry, we would rotate through there with the other companies protecting those fire bases. A couple things would happen. We'd normally get one hot meal a day, and we'd get there were enough helicopters were going back and forth. They'd get our mail to us, anything we needed. Surgeon would come out, look everybody over, make sure that the medics would always tell on us if we weren't taking care of ourselves right. But the guys pretty much took care of their bodies pretty well. Took care of their jungle rot and those things. And we'd stay on the fire base for 5 days, maybe sometimes 6, and then rotate out with another company. We'd be fresh and ready to go, and back to the boonies we would go.
So at a company level, there was always a rotation. There wasn't really a stable group that made up the company, it sounds like.
Oh, no, I meant our company was pretty much a unit,
Okay.
but they typically use a full company to secure a fire base. And so my Bravo company would be there and say Alpha company was there. Well, we'd come in, take it, Alpha company would fly out.
Okay. And now you've described your first mission out. You were there for, was it about a year total
Just
time?
about 10 months and 28 days, not, I kept track.
Are there any other specific missions that stand out that had something maybe different or
Well,
you'd like to
I do
recall?
remember when the 3rd Marines pulled away from up north by the rock pile. We went up there and secured a fire base while this big redeployment was going on. It was a long trip by helicopter. I remember that, which is great because you can get in a helicopter and it's so hot. And they take you up to a couple thousand feet. You just slip your rucksack loose and you just go to sleep. If you can picture 6 adult men sitting on the edge of a helicopter at a couple thousand feet with just a big grin on their face because it's like going into a tavern that's air conditioned with no beer. You don't need the beer because it was so nice. You all that sweat and everything dried, and everything dried out at a couple thousand feet. It was really a wonderful feeling. And I remember that trip though. It was because it was a fairly long trip, and pilots were always good to get us up and cool us off, get us up where it was optimal temperature. You know, it was really cool. It was probably only about 80 degrees.
Now, it sounds like on your first mission there, you were in a jungle terrain. Did you
Yes.
also serve in like a delta area or things like that, or was it pretty much in the same area?
Only when we went up. I remember up by the rock pile, it seemed like there were no hills and such, and very just maybe rolling stuff. And we were only up there for a couple weeks, but the majority of my tour was out in this the more mountainous regions, trails. I do remember going down. We went into what I call the floor of the Aisha Valley. There's an old French air strip down there, and we went down through there, and we were just looking for trails and such. And then on I think the north end of where the valley goes and the hills start up, we encountered, I saw it, and I didn't know that they were that sophisticated, but a lot of the supplies that were coming from the north were carried by coolie labor, food, ammunition, munitions, and everything were being carried. And I said, boy, isn't that inefficient? And the lieutenant said, you know, he says, it costs us about $1 million a day to have a helicopter over here equipped with trained personnel. He says, how much rice can you carry from the north for $1 million a day? I said, oh. And, you know, I didn't have to take my socks and shoes off to do the math. And so it's pretty amazing, but we're going back to this, what I was fascinated with, because these hills, especially with all the rain, and these trails had become very slippery. You'd sometimes slip trying to climb up where there was no existing path. But you find their trails, and they had built staircases out of bamboo. Good bamboo, good stuff. And down these more steep slopes, there were no guardrails, but there were stair steps built in, made out of bamboo. It was phenomenal. That, you know. So.
Now, back to the time when you were not out in the field, what did people do with their spare time besides rest? Was there entertainment or anything?
I think I read in a letter to my parents that I said, I got to finish this letter. I said, I got to get back to these guys. They're all sitting, they won't leave me alone. They're all sitting around trying to impress themselves. But there's this 19 to 21, 22-year-old group of men, the other side of the world. They're not going anywhere. They know that. Are they committed to what they're doing? Probably, for the most part, yes. And you had to, when you had the opportunity, you had to have a level of levity. You had to humor, take shots at one another, not vindictive, mean-spirited stuff. But I remember that being, I guess, fun, because it was like a release, you know. So if we weren't on mission and we had the opportunity, there would be whatever, you know, we couldn't go to the bar or go see a movie or anything, but we could have, you know, you might call it entertain one another. So.
In your 10 months over there, did you get any leave time where you got to go somewhere out of country?
I did. I spent 7 days in Australia and went to Sydney and had a great time. These people are wonderful. And I have to tell this story. I think it's important. And I don't know, you know, if it would occur today, but I'm going to pretend it will. At the morning of my 7th day, I got up and I had to be at the airport at a specific time, and they were all said, you know, good luck to you from the front desk. I mean, they would do that at the Holiday Inn in Benton Harbor too. And then I went out and caught a cab, and the cab took me to the airport. I don't know how much it was going to be, $2-3 or something. And he says, "Where you going, mate?" I said, "I'm going back to Vietnam." He says, "Well, good luck to you, boy. This one's on me." He says, "Where you're going, you need a break." A cab driver would not take my money. It's the little things, you know, really.
Now, you mentioned you had late mail drops out in the field as well as back on base. Do you recall anything of your letters that would be memorable?
Well, I included how excited I was and how well Heinz 57 sauce could be used with some of the stuff that we had, you know, were given in sea rations, and how it made it taste so much better. Kool-Aid, a lot of the water was safe to drink but not palatable. So I preferred the lemon Kool-Aid myself, and so I got plenty of that. Other things, I think a couple things that I included with what I submitted to you folks was a letter telling my parents that we're going back up the other side of Hill 916 again, and we're trying to find a bridge over by the Laotian border. And I said, we think we know where it is. We're going to find it because it's a resupply location. If we find this bridge, we can get it blown up. I said, if we don't find it and we can't get along the river, we're going to go on into Laos and come in from the other side and see if we can find it. And then I said, now don't write your congressman, because we're just going to do this. Nobody really knows. And, you know, it wasn't like we're penetrating Laos or anything, but out there it was like this room or the next room. I mean, who knows? But we wanted to find this bridge so that we could, we wouldn't blow it up. We'd have the fast movers blow it up. But we had to locate it, pinpoint it, because there's a jungle canopy all through there, even over a lot of the rivers, and you cannot visualize and see what's down there. The other thing let's see, what else in my letters? I don't know. I'll think of something.
Do you think you tried to give an accurate portrayal of what you were seeing, experiencing, or was it kind of edited to make the family not worry so much about your experience?
Very much so. You neglected. Nobody wants to dwell on the negative. I mean, you were kept busy enough and I guess tired enough where you couldn't dwell on it too much. And why scare your poor mother? You know, that was my opinion. Sometimes I think I'd go off a little bit and I gotta get out of this horrible, horrible place. But for the most part, it's easier to look back and say, I don't know how I could do that. I look at young people today and I'm not confident that put in similar situations are, I'm sure the World War II folks said that about us, but put in that kind of a situation could deal with it. It's what we had to deal with on a daily basis and the things that we had to do without. I don't know. That's an opinion.
Now, did you keep a diary while you were in, or was it more like you'd rather not remember this when it's all over, and so you didn't want a diary?
This is 40 years later, and the question you asked, Dick, I think is important, and I'm going to seize this opportunity to say that I got to thank the Lest We Forget people, the Don Alsbro and Hank Richmond, because I've talked more about Vietnam in the last 12 weeks than I have the last 40 years. And I know my wife can attest to that. When I went places, somebody say, yeah, you're in the service? Yeah, I was in the Army, and if they didn't go on any further, I wouldn't say anything. And it wasn't like I had this deep, burning psychological problem. I saw no value in it, and no shame, but no pleasure. Did it change me? I'm sure it did, but I'm not smart enough to evaluate it any further, I guess. It didn't define me. It did not define me.
How about as the time approached for your end of your 10 months and 18 days?
28 days.
Okay. Did your mindset change? Did you become more cautious or wary, or what was that feeling?
I was fortunate enough, my last 4 months of my tour, I had developed a pretty good record, and I'd seen General Wright twice, and Captain Erickson had become General Wright's aide, and I was put in for a job as to fly with a FAC, a forward air controller, because they needed the fast movers, the jets, used a forward air controller, flew in a slower bird, communicated with the troops on the ground, and they would mark targets for the jets. But there was a problem communicating. It's like a different dialect between the Air Force, Navy pilots, and the Army guys. You know, it really was a dialect, a slang. And so they'd take sergeants who had, or guys who had time in country and a reasonably good record, and if their officers felt they could handle it, they would rotate them into jobs like that to finish their tour. And I didn't get the first one, somebody else got it. And then another job came up in the Tactical Operations Center, which is where the battalion, which had 5 companies, the colonel, and there's a colonels and majors and first sergeants and such, would maintain their big plastic-covered maps, a couple radios going at all times, communicating with brigade headquarters and communicating with the companies in the field. And they utilized an NCO with field experience to be on shift, if you would, as a 7-8 hour days, polish your boots and get a haircut once a month. And that was the job that I got. I interviewed for it, went back to the field, and then got a call about 10 days later, and they offered me the job. And so I left the field. I didn't feel guilty. I felt like I'd done my part. And so I finished my tour in the Tactical Operations Center, which was usually underground or behind multiple layers of sandbags. And like I said, and I actually found a whole raft of declassified documents, and I have printed, I don't have it here, my last day on at the TOC, where my initials were in the 645 entry in the log that night. So.
Now, do you recall the day of exit when you got to fly back home and what that feeling was like?
April. I do remember it moving fast, and I don't remember, I just remember, and we flew back out of Benoit, and once we were airborne, I think I slept for, I don't know how long. I don't know. I don't remember that, Dick, as being that, all I remember is we were airborne, and we'd probably cleared 10,000 feet, and then there was like this, because I knew we were home free then, on a Freedom Bird, we called
And
it.
where did you arrive back in the States?
SeaTac, Seattle, Tacoma. Processed out, took, I don't know, a day or two. They were very good. There was no hazing or anything. And I think the reason was because the guys that were there rotating people out had been in country, and they knew that these guys don't deserve any bullshit.
But did you feel you had an adequate reacclimation to a normal life after being in that situation for almost 11 months?
The reality is no. We weren't prepared. I was 21 years old, had 3 semesters of college behind me, a lot of excellent military training, but all of a sudden I'm coming home and it's like I have no hair, and it's 1970, and you stood out. You just stood out. I mean, he spot you 100 meters away, and so I felt that, but I do remember I stopped at my sister picked me up at the South Bend Airport. She lives close to there. Took me to my parents' house, and there's this huge sighs of relief, but I couldn't wait to get and go find that Romeo gal up in Benton Harbor. And so off we went. And so my mission was to grow my hair back, disappear into society.
So it sounds like you probably didn't seriously consider extending your service.
It was probably a mistake, but Captain Erickson did think a lot of me, and I don't have the paperwork to support it, but I was offered a commission. I would have had to come back and go through an OCS. They had a special program at OCS. I just said no. I had to get home.
Now, when you got back, did you go back to finish your college education? Or?
I did. I started taking night classes back at LMC. I took a 4-hour biology course one semester. I was working at Whirlpool because I had picked up a job at Whirlpool, and you retain this seniority, and so it was pretty good pay in those days. And I took a chemistry class. I took a biology class, doing pretty well. I mean, if I'd have been doing as well before the Army as I did afterwards. And then the teachers went on strike. And way back when, a lot of you won't remember that. It was like somewhat chaotic and troublesome, and I just didn't go back. And I later on got my degree, but I just worked at Whirlpool for a while, and then I worked construction, and for a little while I worked for a swimming pool manufacturer, and I had a variety of responsibilities there here in St. Joe, and then an old friend of mine, became a friend of mine, was the HR director at this Palisades nuclear plant. And he thought I'd make an excellent chem tech. And I didn't take him up on it. But then all of a sudden, it was getting close, and I've got one kid and thinking about another. And I said, maybe something more stable would be realistic. And Bernie Shaner hired me. And these are people that we know, but I went and worked at the Palisades plant for 20 years.
Now, did you get any of your further education or housing or anything assisted by the GI Bill?
I was raised by very frugal parents. My wife, bless her heart, worked, and she was frugal herself. We had a modest home. I went to night class, and there was a line to go and stand in line for, aid, wherever, and there were like 15 people in that line. And if you paid, there was nobody there. And the class, a 4-hour class, was $260. I paid. I didn't stand in line. It was silly. $260 was a lot of money in 1970, 71. I just paid it. It was just, I don't think I told you that, but you saw the check. So, no, I didn't utilize any of the aid.
Yeah, I'm sure after all your time in such close quarters with your squad mates there, some real bonding went on. Do you maintain any relationships with people today?
Not as much as I should. I talked with a couple people since then. One of the unique things about Vietnam was the constant rotation, the individual replacements. And I didn't really bond that much with anybody in particular, although thanks to Lest We Forget, I think more and more about it. And recently Hank got me the name and address of someone who I had a great deal of respect for. I went through 3 lieutenants. One was right out of OCS. One had been in ROTC, and one came out of the academy. And Lieutenant Stephen Bowman was just about as good as they could get, and Hank was gracious enough to find his location, and I'm in the midst of writing him a letter right now because I couldn't access an email address. So, and I have talked with others. There was a young man from Buchanan, Terry Hanley, and Terry Hanley went to NCO school as well. he came in the last 4 months of my tour, and I guess we're here to tell stories. Okay. Terry Hanley was in, I believe, Charlie Company, 1st to 506th. He was an infantry squad leader, and I was working in the Tactical Operations Center. And I had talked to him a couple times on Freedom Push, and do you know what Freedom Push is? If you have access to a PRIC 25 radio, PRC 25 radio, and you turn both the knobs all the way to the top frequencies, that's a chatter. That's where people meet and talk. And anybody there from Michigan, anybody there from wherever, well, if you find somebody and they squeak it in, say drop a nickel or drop a dime or drop a quarter, and you click down however many it takes to find an open frequency. It's not authorized by the military by any means, but Freedom Push. I actually, I'm telling stories. I found Jim Rodell from Eau Claire when we were up by the rock pile. He was up on top of the rock pile, and a guy I'd known from Lake Michigan College, and we had a nice talk one night, and I was through leaving. So, and I've seen Jim since I've been home too. He had been in Germany. He was going by the call sign Luxembourg, and I was going by Tango Tango because that's what everybody called me because of my initials and the phonetic alphabet. Anyway, back to Terry Handley, squad leader, Charlie Company. His grandmother passed on, and do you send a kid home for losing his grandmother? I don't know, but he told me, and I said, well, let me check. And so I went to Colonel Holt, and I said, Colonel, guy I know is a squad leader at Charlie Company, very, very close family, he's lost his grandmother. I said, is there any way he can go home? He says, you sure he's pretty close with the family? I said, yes, sir. He said, get him home. Now, I don't know if he'd have gone home or not anyhow, but this story goes on. And about 10 years ago, and I don't remember the details, but my wife, them say, you're going to get a phone call later somehow. And I was like, what's this pre-stage deal? And anyway, this call comes in, I go in the other room, and it's Terry's mother. And she says, thank you for giving me my son. I said, I don't get it. She just kept going on and on. What had happened is probably half of Terry's squad had gotten killed or injured while Terry was home. And Terry is a stand-up guy. I mean, he was a good athlete, he's leadership qualities, and he was gone. And there was a level of, and I saw, because Terry and I got together after that, and he felt guilty about coming home. What's the term? Survivor's remorse. And here's a classic example. And he was crying. This full-grown man wouldn't whip you, but he'd whip the rest of us. And he felt horrible because he felt he could have made a difference. And then, anyway, too many stories.
So Ted, how did your experience influence your thinking about the military or current day war situations?
I admire anybody that goes in the military and stays in the military and performs. There's so much good that can come out of it. I think in an ideal situation, all young men it would be a good experience for all of them. I think we'd have a much more disciplined population. I feel that there's a good possibility that the one of two things with respect to post-traumatic stress syndrome, it's either being abused by people networking on how to fall into that, or it's the result of young people who have been catered to too much their entire life and have never had to step up or never had to do without. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a you know what I mean. But it worries me when I see the numbers that I'm hearing within the media for what that's worth. It worries me that if the numbers are that high, there's something horribly wrong. I know that there are people who had experiences that were very, very difficult experiences, and you cannot avoid having it affect them. But anyway, those are my thoughts on it, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Dick, you asked me, and I'm going to tell the story I did. I was awarded I got an air medal because we went on red smoke, but I was on the second bird. But Hot LZ, I was awarded an air medal along with a number of other awards. I was awarded a second Silver Star. One night, a fire base was attacked in the Ashaw Valley, and it was attacked by, and the sapper attack was on my squads, in my squad sector. A very violent attack that began 3:15 in the morning, and 3:15 and daylight at 5:30. We had over 2 hours. We had a lot of flares going, and we had helicopters coming in and dropping flares, but it was still, there's nothing like daylight to penetrate all the little nooks and crannies. And my guys they were getting low and running out of ammunition. And so I did a couple things. The ammo dump was about 30 meters down from my bunker, and we started gathering in ammunition and redistributing ammunition. I grabbed one of my guys, and we utilized a 90 millimeter recoilless rifle, which is not typical fare. It's an infantry weapon. And I grabbed a box of beehive rounds. This is a horrible, horrible thing, but it's flechettes, thousands of flechettes, little barbed hooks. And we knew that these sappers were coming up this one particular area, and he and I sat there and fired, I don't know how many rounds of 90 millimeter flechette rounds, and they stopped. So we beat them back, and then we again guys were running out of ammunition, and I made several trips around the perimeter redistributing ammunition, firing some flares in the air, and keeping everything as it needed to be up until daylight. And of course, when daylight hit, they DD'd out, and the ones that were still alive, we counted 31 or 32 dead NVA at daybreak. A large portion of them were on our sector, the perimeter. After that, along with, I think, the one lieutenant was awarded a Silver Star for that effort. So, very proud of that.
Okay.
Okay.
If you don't have anything else, I think that's
I
about
would,
it.
as project director here, I'll throw in a stray question or two. You told really a pretty remarkable story here. The impression that we've got from what you've told us here is that pretty much your whole time in Vietnam, you were mostly up kind of in forward areas and away from places that had any civilian population?
That's correct, and that's, I guess being in that situation was very fortunate, because not knowing who's your friend and who's your foe, that'd be extremely difficult. And my admiration goes out for those who had to deal with that. Some of the horrible things that had to be done, that judgment calls. Has this person got a weapon? Is that woman, that child? These are I am considering myself fortunate to not have to dealt with that. that would just, coming from a family with, I don't know how many cousins and little kids were always a part of that. I mean, it had been very difficult.
And how much contact did you have with South Vietnamese, either military or civilian?
We had Kit Carson scouts intermittently, and their English was broken, but most of them spoke French. I spoke reasonably good French in those days, and because I'd had it in high school and some in college. And then there were a couple others that back at Camp Evans that I had an opportunity to. And what I discovered is they're no different than we are. They want the same things that we do. They wanted some peace and tranquility in their life. So that was my impression. So one last thing, I got to tell stories. There was a Loach pilot I got to be friends with, and when I was working my job in the rear in the Tactical Operations Center, it was an 8-hour-a-day job, and I was very, very fit in those days. If you saw me walk in here at 200 and almost 30 pounds, I weighed 180 pounds and was probably an inch taller then. But in the off time, you could get into mischief to a certain degree, but the Loach is a light observation helicopter, one of these little bitty ones, very fast. And he let me try and drive that thing for about 3 seconds, and he took that back away from me because it's like a Ferrari. Anyway, we would deliver mail, and sometimes if people needed something in particular, they needed a case of M16 ammunition or frag grenades or something. Because he loved to fly. He absolutely loved to fly. And we would always take mail to my company anyhow, if we were going out, my old company, and some of the others had to wait until their regular resupply date. But we adopted a family, and I'm waiting, I can't find this picture, and I've got this picture, and I'd always go over to the mess hall and just walk in like I own the place and take a case of sea rations, just put it under my arm, walk back out. At the mess hall, it's next to the mess hall, which is a supply thing, and we'd go and we'd take off, and those kids would hear the helicopter buzzing around. We'd buzz to make sure everything looked to be in order, and then he'd come down and I'd kick that case of sea rations out, and those kids would go over and grab it. And it just was a feel good, like I said. I've got a picture of that family somewhere, and I got to find it because they're looking up, and you can see a little bit of the splay from the air being blown by the helicopter. And we'd do some other things we weren't supposed to do. We'd go hunting, and I'd take CS grenades in my M16, and if we found suspect areas, I'd drop CS grenades and to see if somebody would come running out that wasn't supposed to be there. And we'll leave it at that. That's great to be 21.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, anything further?
All right, well, that takes care of everything for us, so thank you very much.